I'm no judge. All right, music fans, welcome. Harmless Dave here talking real music in real time for a couple of real people who remain just like you, just like me. So Paul Stanley, right? A guy who just can't stay out of the news when it comes to talking about the thing, is making this weird analogy, basically based on the number of things that are required for child thingage. You know, when you take those things when you're younger, I think a lot of people, by the way, are rethinking that program after seeing what's going on. And Paul Stanley, of course, just like all of the corporate media, forgets to make the analogy, which is very simple to make, that this particular thing isn't like the things that you got when you were a kid. Nope, it's not at all. The technology is very different. So when someone says, it's just like getting the thing when you're a kid. And by the way, that regimen, if you look at it, it's a little incredible. And, not to make any kind of assumption based on what we've seen when it comes to things like ADHD, autism, brain fog, all the things that seem to be far more prevalent than they used to be. I think it's quite, apt to question all of it and not just sort of turn a blind eye to it. But what these people try to do is they try to convince you using warped logic. Well, you did it as a kid, so just do it again now. And people are beginning to complain because the number of things, because back in the beginning of this, you just had to get one thing, and now you have to acquire a second thing and a third thing. I think if you're in Israel, you're up to 4 or 5 things, which does seem a bit excessive. And my question to Paul Stanley would be, so Paul, when do we hit a number that feels a little uncomfortable to you? Is it 5? Is it 6? Is it 10? I mean, you're trying to make this comparison between, and by the way, this is for one specific problem. The childhood things are for different problems. So you take one for a specific problem and you're good. You take another one for another specific problem and you're good. You're not taking 5 for one specific problem. So his analogy is stupid and it falls apart quite easily. Now, the KISS frontman who tested positive for the thing back in August took to his Twitter on Monday, because he can't shut up, to point out that certain childhood things have been used for decades. Of course, he talks about polio, which again, I don't want to go on a tangent about what caused polio. I think, what was it? Joni Mitchell sang about it. I'll give you a little hint. Anyway, he talks about they require 4 or more things to complete the program. So do you trust everything? He talks about polio and chicken pox and measles and chicken pox again and whooping cough and all these other things. He goes, share your opinions here, but no education through rudeness. Well, here's the deal. My opinion is that none of those things are necessary. I'm just going to throw it out there. I don't believe any of those things are necessary. Now, you may think that this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, but because of the way this was rolled out, and because the technology being employed is a little different from some of the prior things that have come out, I would say skepticism is certainly in order here. And the length of testing that one would go through to bring something to market. There's this law that was passed called right to try, because in the past, the FDA was really slow at bringing something to market. And the reason for that Number one is bureaucracy, but number two is that they wanted to test it and make sure that it actually did what it was supposed to do. And when I say test, I mean long-term testing. I don't mean short-term testing. I don't mean having it in development for 20 years, but then testing it for 3 or 4 months and telling everybody, hey, it's ready to go. Because the other claim is, oh, this technology has been around for a long time. And so has nuclear power, right? Nuclear power was around for a long time. So did we immediately build nuclear reactors? Probably not. We probably had to test it for quite some time and to figure out how to harness it and keep it safe. And when we felt comfortable, we decided to go forward with that. And by the way, that didn't always work out so well. Now, did it? Anyway, he has to talk about this because he posted that silly picture of him and his Dodge Omni face. And he told the story about how his entire family had gotten the Dodge Omni runaway 4-door sedan variant, okay? And that's not variant like Reliant K. That would be a different car. But he got the super common car, right? Or his family got the common car. And it is a very common car, more common probably right now than the actual Dodge Omni. He goes on to say, well, I'm negative for the thing, he wrote on Monday. If you have any doubts about your home test results, get a lab test, because of course you can never be satisfied with just one test. You have to keep testing. You have to go to the ballpark to get a test. You have to go to the drugstore. We have this place, I think, called Med Express, where I live. I went out this morning. There was a line out the door of this place, out into the parking lot. I don't know what's going on out there. I think probably people have to do this in order to go to their job because they refuse to do the thing. So this is what you have to do to jump through the hoops that the government requires or your employer requires. By the way, pretty much every major employer now is linked to the federal government through one way or another. So anybody who says it's the private sector, dude, I go, yeah, what's so private about this, right? They can't just say employers or employees rather, if they're feeling good, they should come to work. That's my law. That's my rule. If you're feeling well, come to work. If you're not feeling well, then you might want to stay home. All right. So Stanley goes on to talk about how many of these germ-fighting particles he now has because he's had 3 things. Plus, he also got the thing. But that's not necessarily true because I've heard, again, Paul Stanley he traffics in one area. He doesn't, and this is the news media too. They all traffic in one area where people just go along with this government narrative, right? And there's this other narrative, like what Dr. Peter McCullough talked about with Joe Rogan, and nobody is smarter. Do you think Dr. Peter McCullough is smarter than Paul Stanley? I do. I think he's infinitely smarter than Paul Stanley. So when Paul Stanley takes to Twitter to become a medical expert, what he ought to do is reach out to a guy like Peter McCullough and say, hey, Dr. McCullough, you've got a lot of knowledge. You've written papers, a lot of them, peer-reviewed things. You were considered a top doctor prior to this thing-demic where everybody is blasting you because you're not going along with the narrative and people are trying to throttle down all the information. By the way, the Peter McCullough, Joe Rogan interview happens to be the most viewed or listened to podcast in podcasting history, okay? And I'm sure more people will go and take a listen as time goes on because Dr. Peter McCullough is a pretty sharp dude, all right? And I think he might take issue with some of these ill-informed statements that Paul Stanley continues to make. The article goes on to say that the Dodge Omni has quickly become the most common form of the thing here in the US, accounting for 73% of all of the things, according to federal officials. What's a federal official? Seriously, what is that? Anyway, based on early studies, those who are up to date on their Walgreens trips are far less likely to be admitted to the ICU with the Dodge Omni than the previous Delta Dawn variant. However, the higher transmissibility of the Dodge Omni means that you're going to have to buy a Chrysler New Yorker. No, it means the risk of health systems being overloaded during the winter period is still quite high. It is clear that if you've done the thing and you've had the extra thing, the Dodge Omni tends to produce a mellower effect, says Dr. William Schaffner, who, of course, is being paid off by somebody in pharma, and he pretends to be an infectious disease expert at Vanderbilt University Medical Center in beautiful Nashville, Tennessee, which is still mostly shut down. What we haven't seen yet is the substantial body of information about what the Dodge Omni will do to the unthinged population. Well, why do they care? Because they typically don't care about the unthinged people. They go on, little cut and paste article here. After Stanley contracted the thing in August, Kiss was forced to postpone a string of shows. A few days later, Kiss announced that bassist Gene Simmons had also tested positive for the thing. As a result, the band postponed 4 more concerts. Yeah, so this is the gist of it. Paul Stanley being your doctor and saying, oh, well, you should do this because as a kid, you were required to do this. Now, when someone says you're required to do something, they better have a really good reason. And to rethink this entire system, which was stolen from actual medical people back in like 1920, people who were practicing medicine, practicing healing, not practicing sick care, practicing actual health care. This was stolen from those people, right? And it's been that way for 100 years. And we're realizing now because pharma, government, they're all in bed together. And then you've got these so-called entertainers who want to be liked by these people, or I don't know if they're getting checks from these people, but if they're not, it's ridiculous because the kind of work they're doing on behalf of the government, I would expect a kickback from the little emperor and his, minion of court jesters, all of these extra people who are all around, who are basically saying the same thing to me. That sounds very, very suspicious. But am I alone? Don't know. I'm thinking that maybe, just maybe, people are onto this. They're starting to get onto this because they're now complaining to Paul Stanley about the number, right? I have to do this how many times, Paul? How many times? And Paul's like, well, as a kid, in order to fight this, this, and this. And yet, what's going on with ADHD? What's going on with autism? What's going on with all of these different things, real things that we didn't used to encounter? And we didn't. The data is there to prove it. I know he's big into just cherry picking the left side of this equation and plucking all of that data and then presenting it to his so-called fans as if it's fact. But man, oh man, he's got a lot of splaining to do when it comes to certain countries like the UK and Israel and Gibraltar, and hey, in certain countries like Japan, where they decided to take matters into their own hands and use the horse paste. And then the graph went like this. And they go, oh, it's a miracle. I wonder what they're doing over there. We should do, no, you can't do what they're doing, because then you'd be hanging out with farm animals. You'd be at the local feed store and you'd have yourself a whole tube of paste. And then you have to start consuming that paste. And you can't do that. That stuff will kill you, man. So anyway, sorry for the horrible impressions here, but this is what I do. This is what I've been reduced to. I'd rather be talking about this amazing list of melodic rock bands I have for the year 2021. I will be putting that list out soon so I can talk about music. But when Paul Stanley, who is still a member of KISS, who I hope gets to complete the End of the Road tour soon, so I don't have to listen to his sorry ass speaking to me anymore, that would be really cool. And by the way, yes, he is talking through that part of his body. I'm getting a little tired of it. And I would like him to shut up and talk about when the end of the road is going to start. And even more importantly, tell us when the end of the road will be done. So you'll be out of the media spotlight. So you'll stop talking like you're the little Emperor Junior about all things medical. Because when these guys cover you every single day as if you're a doctor, which you're not, okay, it gets a little tedious from my end, okay? I'm looking for actual music news, but instead I've got medical apartheid, which is just fantastic. And forcing people to do something against their will, just a little clue here, Paul Stanley, you should know this one, coercing medical treatment is against the Nuremberg Code. And you should know what that is. You and Gene should be very familiar with the Nuremberg Code. And if you're not, I think it might be time to do a little research, Paul Stanley. All right, I am done with this video. Thanks for watching. I do have a political channel, and I'm going to try to link to that channel. I do actually way more content over here. But, you know, if you want kind of like supplemental insurance, you know, you want an extra policy and you want to watch this and then watch that, yeah, it's open for business, and I will start sharing the link. Until next time, my name is Dave, and try to smile through all of the darkness, because remember, according to the president, it's going to be a very dark winter.